Hi, I'm Mimi Geerges. When Pakistan was created in 1947, it was to be a secular democracy where the rights of minorities were protected, but things turned out very differently.
Pakistan is a warning that if you start heading down that path of legalizing hatred and discrimination, you are going to end up justifying mob rule, further fanning the flames.
Welcome to the Mimi Geerges Show. "70 years ago, about a quarter of Pakistan's population was non-Muslim. That figure stands at only 3% now. While the idea was to have a state for South Asia's Muslims that was secular and democratic, in reality, Pakistan became an Islamic state where religious minorities were subjected to draconian laws and routinely imprisoned or killed. Farahnaz Ispahani is a former member of the National Assembly of Pakistan and author of the book Purifying the Land of the Pure, A History of Pakistan's Religious Minorities. Farah, welcome.
Thank you.
In March 2016, there was an attack in a park in Lahore. Christian families were celebrating Easter. 73 were killed, and 29 of them were children. Now, the Islamist group that carried it out said that they wanted the government to stop attacking them on the border with Afghanistan. Christians have nothing to do with that.
It's very interesting, Mimi. In the history of Pakistan, what was meant to, as you were saying, be a secular and multicultural country. Very soon after, I'd say 1 year after the started the Islamization of Pakistan. And with that, over the years, whether it's been laws or it's been societal changes through textbooks that promote hate speech towards religious minorities, be they Hindu, be they Christian, or Muslim minorities like the Ahmadis and the Shias. And so you now have this culture of impunity and also this whole sort of definition. For example, Christians are seen when anything happens that is negative to Pakistan or viewed as negative. In the US, for example, the Christian community will be attacked. If something happens with bilateral relations or in terms of a terrorist incident in India, in Pakistan, they'll blame Pakistani Hindus. So the definition has been basically they have otherized our religious minorities as not being really citizens of Pakistan, of not being really Pakistani. And that's what, at the end of the day, this terrorist group meant when they attacked the Christians.
Let's go back in history to the point right before partition. So you had one country, which was India, ruled by the British. We know Mahatma Gandhi and his struggle for independence. Why partition the country? Why create Pakistan in the first place?
Many people today look at Pakistan and think, would it not have been better to have left it all as it was, as undivided India? But at that time, the thinking was of Mr. Jinnah, who was the founder of Pakistan, known as the Qaid-e-Azam or the great leader. He truly believed that if the British left, there would be what I call communal majoritarianism, which means that the Hindus would be the majority and that they would be, unfair to the Muslim minority. And so they talked about a two-state solution, like people have talked about with Israel and Palestine for so long.
But during the British rule, did they not get along? Did they feel like they would have been threatened by a Hindu majority India?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is what the founders thought, that if they were left behind, that the British had been the buffer, and that once the British left, that the Hindu majority would become, they wouldn't have jobs, they would be physically unsafe, they wouldn't be able to practice their religion in peace, and that they would become second-class citizens in India, the Muslims.
But in hindsight, do you think that would have actually happened?
I actually, all my trips to India recently and talking to young people there, it's very interesting. You meet young Indian Muslims who say, how could you have left us behind? Because we took away a lot of the most educated and well-off Muslims from India and left a lot of the Muslim community leaderless and rudderless. And that is always the attempt. So even though India today has almost as many Muslims as Pakistan, it makes it even more nonsensical. But I, being born as a first-generation Pakistani, have only known being Pakistani. But whether it makes sense is a different question.
You mentioned him, Pakistan's founding father, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and he said this, quote, "You are free. You may belong to any religion or caste or creed that has nothing to do with the business of the state." Not everyone bought into that.
Absolutely not. While he was still alive but very ill, Mr. Jinnah died within the first year after the creation of Pakistan. Within the first year, they had started moving against his vision and his mission. So obviously a lot of people were along for the ride, and once he was no longer there as the great leader, the combination of religion and politics started right away.
Has Pakistan, in its 70-year history, ever been a secular democracy?
I would say that the concept was there, but over the years, we have moved further and further and further away from that. Pakistan today is neither secular nor multicultural, nor a safe place to be if you are not a majority Sunni Muslim.
Why did the clerics and the Islamists win the discussion, though, when there were such high hopes for how Pakistan would be?
Well, the same Islamists who were against the idea of Pakistan were turned to by the politicians.
But why were they against the creation of Pakistan?
Because they believed that it would not be a Sharia state. And they did not
Islamic enough, you mean?
Yes, they did not believe in Mr. Jinnah's vision. They thought this sort of secular state was an abomination. Like in Israel today, you have a lot of, very orthodox Jews who say that Israel should not exist on these same lines, that it's not Jewish enough or pure enough as a Jewish state. So Pakistan and Israel, born 1 year apart, have both headed in similar directions. So I think Pakistan has far exceeded where Israel is today.
The Ahmadis are a sect of Islam. They have a Messiah figure and a prophet that came after Islam's prophet Muhammad. So they're not only persecuted in Pakistan, they aren't even allowed to call themselves Muslim.
They cannot call themselves Muslim. I mean,
and this is a law. This isn't just
absolutely.
how people act.
In 1974, they were created by law, constitutional decree, as non-Muslim, which means that they cannot practice Islam. If Ahmadis are caught saying their prayers or having an azan, a call for prayer from any of their places of worship, if they call their places of worship masjids, any of that, these are all crimes that are punishable by the law. Each Pakistani signs a form when you go to apply for a passport that says, "I declare Ahmadis as believers in an impostor, and I believe that Ahmadis are non-Muslim." So each Pakistani has to sign that. That was one of the reasons why.
But what if you're an Ahmadi and obviously you can't sign that? Does that mean you don't get a passport?
Many Ahmadis either fled the country in 74 over the years after that. They've been reduced to almost a non-human status.
Even before the 70s in 1953, there were riots against them, and that left 2,000 Ahmadis dead.
Yes.
The scale is unbelievable.
That was the first major anti-Ahmadi uprising. And so very, very, early on, the clerics were very clear that the Ahmadis had to be rooted out because, it was almost blasphemous when they called themselves Muslim. So they were an issue that had to be dealt with. And ever since then, that community has suffered, and there's no other country in Pakistan which considers Ahmadis non-Muslim. No other country.
In 1971, there was a civil war which led to the creation of Bangladesh in the east. What impact did that have?
It had a huge impact because it further diluted. East Pakistan, as it was known then, which became Bangladesh, had a very large Hindu population. And so after 1971, so we had two cullings of the population, one at the time of partition in 47 and the second one in 71. So there was a further reduction in the religious minority population. In fact, the only additional minorities Pakistan has gained are the Ahmadis, who we made into a minority, you know. So it's a very sad story. And it's a warning, actually, because if you see what's happening in Egypt, in Yemen, all over the Middle East, Pakistan is a warning that if you start heading down that path of legalizing hatred and discrimination, you are going to end up justifying mob rule and further fanning the flames towards those of other faiths.
You know, we're talking about Pakistan, but I do wonder about Bangladesh, because today, you know, you've got secular bloggers being murdered in the streets. I wonder if that was maybe a result of them losing their Hindu minority.
Well, partially, I think in Bangladesh, what has happened is, and what's happened in Pakistan and has happened all over the world, are Saudi madrasas, the Saudi Islamic schools, which are, I mean, they're thousands in numbers. I mean, perhaps 20,000. It's almost difficult to count. All over Pakistan, all over Bangladesh, and all over the Muslim world. And these clerics, they have brought with them a very non-South Asian Islam. It is a Wahhabi Salafi Islam, which is not indigenous to our Sufi past.
This is from the petrodollars, so-called.
Petrodollars, and it was both initially the Saudi government funding, and then to this day, Saudi individual families fund the building of these sort of schools in countries other than theirs.
And in these schools, they're not teaching like math and science and critical thinking.
There's no critical thinking, but also it's not theology. It is a very small sort of ideology which has gained so much strength because of the petrodollar. That is, I think, an ideology of hate.
Have Islamists ever been satisfied with concessions made by the Pakistani government?
Not at all. When they talk about the purification of Pakistan, you started by asking about the Easter massacre last Easter. Each and every time they conduct the murder of people of other faiths, they say it's to purify Pakistan, purify them of elements who are impure. And, you know, that takes you to, you know, say Asia Bibi, this Christian woman who's been on death row in Pakistan for many, many years for blasphemy.
She's a mother of 5.
Mother of 5, and she was a laborer in the fields.
What was she accused of?
She was accused of blaspheming against the Prophet Muhammad solely for she was asked to get some water, and when she brought the water, these other women in the field who were not Christian said it's impure. The quarrel started like that. It's impure, we can't drink it, because she's a Christian. Even though the Quran in Islam says that Jesus Christ is a major prophet, and Mary is of the highest level of woman in the Quran. Not Fatima, the prophet's daughter, no one else. It's Bibi Maryam, Mary. So they started a fight, and within the fight, they said she blasphemed against the Prophet Muhammad. And she's been locked up, unable to see her children. Her health is dwindling. And
how long has she been in prison?
She has spent 7 Christmases in prison. And there have been efforts now all over the world, and very recently, right here in the United States, 2 senators have passed a resolution calling for Pakistan to free Asia Bibi because she's under threat in jail. Our jails are infested with jihadis, whether it is the jailers or other inmates. Our army has been infested with this bug, and we're a nuclear armed power. So poor Asia Bibi, who is a poor woman, needs to get out. And I'm very, very pleased that both USEF, the United States Commission for International Religious Freedom, and these 2 senators have passed this resolution asking for the freedom of Asia Bibi and to be allowed to take her out of the country, somewhere where she and her family can be safe. She'll never be safe in Pakistan.
Well, speaking of blasphemy laws, in 1977, General Zia ul-Haq took power, and things went from bad to worse.
I think one of the things people in the past used to think was if you saw an Ataturk-like figure, like in Turkey, the army used to be secular in many of our countries. But you look at Egypt today, where President Sisi thinks he's being spoken to personally, by his maker. You look at Erdogan in Turkey. Zia ul-Haq was the first military dictator in a Muslim country to set out to fully Islamize and institutionalize Islamization within the code and the culture and the ethics of Pakistan.
What were some of the changes that he made?
Well, for women, number one, the first thing that somehow religious bigots always do is go after women, somehow putting women in their place. So he passed a slew of laws which took away rights that women had had since the inception of Pakistan. He also created the world's harshest blasphemy law. We'd inherited a blasphemy law that was been on the books, legal books since the British. But that blasphemy law protected people of all religions and all faiths to be protected against anybody showing hatred towards you, whether you were Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Muslim. What Zia did was created laws that were all about injuring the sensibilities of Muslims, blaspheming about the Prophet Muhammad, burning the Holy Quran. So most of the people that you see imprisoned usually actually have not done any of these things, but any neighbor who wants to take over a house or an expensive piece of church property has to just bring up an allegation of blasphemy.
There are even cases in your book where they said this kid wrote blasphemous things on the wall, and it turns out he can't even write, he's illiterate.
But the moment he was accused of blasphemy, you see, you're as good as dead. Because that's how mob justice works in Pakistan now. My former colleague, Governor Salman Taseer, who stood up for Asia Bibi, was gunned down, 38 bullets. I was one of the first people in the morgue. My colleague in Parliament, Minister Shahbaz Bhatti, who was the first Christian federal minister in Pakistan. He was the Minister of Minority Affairs. He was murdered soon after also for protesting against the blasphemy laws. I have lost so many friends that the reason I wrote this book, I didn't make the book passionate. I made it a book of history so that it would be indisputable. I went back to the original sources. I want this book to be read very widely, not for selling the books, but I see what's happening all over the world now. And there has to be a concentrated effort to stop this.
And even, the men that you mentioned that were killed, their killers were feted like heroes.
Absolutely.
Even in the court system. I mean, this isn't just the mob.
For Governor Salman Taseer to get a federal prosecutor who's willing to take the case was almost impossible.
And this was a cold-blooded murder. It wasn't even a question as to who.
He was killed by one of his own security detail. It was witnessed by the other members of the security detail, and no one lifted their gun to shoot the assailant. They stood there in a circle and watched the man they had vowed to protect be murdered. And as you say, Mumtaz Qadri, who killed him, today, firstly, it was so hard to get a prosecutor, and that prosecutor, the minute he gave the verdict for Mumtaz Qadri to be, judicially tried, and given the death penalty, we had to fly him. I was in government in those days, out to another country with his entire family. He lives anonymously in another country. He could not remain in Pakistan having done that. And today they've built a massive shrine to Mumtaz Qadri.
To the killer.
To the killer. And thousands of people, they now call him a saint. And
just because he killed somebody that dared to criticize the blasphemy law.
Absolutely. And to protect this young woman that she was at the time, mother of 5. So it's a very frightening now, the mindset and mob power, as I say, But the scariest thing is, you see, these days now, everything's permeable. A mosque here in the greater Washington area recently held a service in praise of Mumtaz Qadri in the United States of America, in the metro Washington, D.C. area. That is how terrifying this mindset is.
So it's even gotten here. This isn't just
Absolutely.
In Pakistan. Is it possible for religious minorities in any Islamic state to live as an equal citizen?
There was a time where, in Pakistan, and I think you would probably say in Egypt and all over the Middle East and South Asia, at least, where the Christian community, for example, was highly respected. There were the teachers, there were the educators, they were in they were in the armed forces, they were in the bureaucracy. That's all changed now. And I don't see any country today in the Muslim world where a religious minority can feel safe.
What's the end game for the Islamists? Like, once they, quote, purify Pakistan from Christians, from Hindus, from Shias, what then?
The culling will continue, and that's what none of them understand. When you start going after this purified state, the process will continue about who's pure enough. And that was one of the things we learned in 1953 when the commission that was brought in to examine the murder of the Ahmadis, in large numbers in Lahore. One of the things they found, they interviewed clerics of all stripes, Muslim clerics. Not one of them agreed on what was the definition of Islam and who was a Muslim. This was in 1953. We've learned nothing.
What does the typical Pakistani say about all of this? Is it just a matter of there's uneducated or the clerics, they're the ones doing all this, but most Pakistanis are very reasonable and open people?
I mean, I don't think any human being is at the root of it bad. But if you grow up reading textbooks in all public schools, which say, Hindus are dark idol worshippers, that Christians are agents of the British, that, each and every religious minority is described in these terms. And I actually hate the term religious minority. It's actually Pakistani citizen, whatever faith, but that's not how life is today. So they take these little children and it's brainwashing.
Yeah. What's your message to other countries, to the United States? What is it that we should learn from Pakistan's experience?
My message to the United States has been for a very, very long time that, they keep doing business with these states and there are no penalties attached. And I don't think it's very difficult to have a religious freedom or religious tolerance rider on any bills of aid to these countries. Pakistan and Egypt and all of these, Saudi Arabia, they need the toys for the boys. They need the weapons, they need the aid, they need all of that for their economies. So why does the United States not ask for something which is so basic? I mean, it's a universal human law. Everyone's a signatory to the UN resolution. Why is the State Department, why is the White House, why is the Pentagon so resistant to what is supposed to be an American value? It's time to change that, and that's what I hope we can start with.
Farahnaz, thank you so much for being on the program.
Thank you so much.
This has been the Mimi Geerges Show. You can see all of our programs on WHUT.org and YouTube. Connect with us on Facebook and Twitter and leave me your comments there. I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and I hope you'll join me again next time.
This program was produced by WHUT, Howard University Television, and made possible by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.